everyone, welcome back to my channel. For this month's video, I have decided to do a little challenge where I read all of the books that have been on my Goodreads to be read list the longest. I have decided to read 4 books that have been on my TBR for the longest amount of time. Now, I use my Goodreads pretty frequently and I update it pretty frequently, so there is not a lot on my TBR list that is from decades ago or even from years ago. Most of them are within the past 3 years, but I wanted to get them out of the way, and I thought, what better way to do that than with this fun reading challenge? So after doing some digging, I realized that the book that has been on my TBR the longest is the Vampire Encyclopedia of the Undead, which I added to my Goodreads in 2022 after I received it as a gift. Now, of course, I will not be reading that because that is an encyclopedia, which is why it has been on my TBR for the longest. It's just something that I'm eventually gonna have to look through. Now, as for the other books on my list, we have An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson, which I put there in 2024, I believe, as well as Batman Gotham by Gaslight. As you can see, this is a very teeny tiny little issue, and this is set in the time where there were the Jack the Ripper killings, and Batman is an established vigilante in this time. So it's a little Otherworld's what if story if he was trying to solve the Jack the Ripper case. The other 2 books that I have on my TBR that have been there the longest are, of course, Batman and Dracula Red Rain, I believe it is called, which is Batman meeting and fighting Dracula, as well as the book that I would consider to be on my to be read list the longest, even though I only added it very, very recently because I got a copy of it, is The Wolf Gift by Anne Rice. This book came out, I think, longer than 10 years ago, and I just never had a copy of it. I always wanted to read all of Anne Rice's supernatural fiction, and I guess now is the perfect time to finally delve into her werewolf fiction. Thankfully, this series only had 2 books to it, so I'm not delving into a 15-book long arc that I did when I read the Vampire Chronicles. I also have another book that has been on my TBR for the longest, and that is one of the Sookie Stackhouse murder mystery novels, but I read one a year and I read it in October. So as you can see in the screenshot, it says October 2024 because that was when I finished the last book, and I will be adding that next one to the list next year. So I get to those inevitably, so that is not going to be part of this challenge. So I have the 4 books that I am going to be reading for this challenge, and now we can safely get those books out of my TBR list and make it lesser so I have more room to add even more books. So we shall see how I feel about all of these books, so stay tuned. I just had to close all the windows in my house because, like, everyone on my street is mowing their lawn. That's just the consequences of living on an old people's street. So anyway, I am about 40 pages from finishing An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. For those of you who don't know, this has been marketed as a Carmilla retelling. The 2 main characters of the story are named Laura and Carmilla, and they are academic rivals at an all-women's college in the 1960s. And the premise of the novel is that they are both fighting for the respect of one of their female professors, Miss Dilla Fontaine, and they end up getting either farther apart or closer as a result. It's a rivals to lovers style book. And it is not what I expected at all. I was expecting sort of a generic, consistent retelling of Carmilla to some capacity, but there are a lot of liberties taken, obviously, because the original novella is so short. You want to add more to your story, and I think the idea of setting it in the 60s is pretty interesting, but it's not really followed through very well. The relationship between Laura and Carmilla is pretty interesting because Laura has more of an antagonistic view of Carmilla, and Carmilla is more of a brat in return, so their dynamic is very twisted as a result of that. It's sort of a subversion of what is normally the case, being Laura being really, really innocent and Carmilla being seen as, like, right, the vampiric force that is taking advantage of her. I think the addition of the professor was a little bit off. I don't think it's really that compelling, and I don't think it is hitting as it should. There are warnings at the beginning of this novel about a toxic relationship between a professor and student, and I think that that is a bit overly exaggerated. They have not done anything overtly explicit, so I don't even think that the warning is really that important. There is not a lot in here that would be very upsetting to a reader, so all of the warnings at the beginning were just a little bit over-exaggerated. As a result, I don't think this is going to be my favorite S.T. Gibson. I have liked Evocation, and I have liked A Dowry of Blood way more than I liked this one, but I don't hate it, and there is really nothing to complain about, nothing for me to rant about or discuss too heavily. So I think this is just going to be an alright addition to my collection. I think my biggest issue with it is that it skews just a bit younger than I was expecting. I get that they are in college, they're college age, but it is skewing a bit more. It seems like they're more teenager than they are a new adult, if you get what I'm saying there. And that's okay. S.T. Gibson can write something that skews a bit younger if she wants. Even though there is sexual content in here, it's pretty vague. So yeah. That is my feelings on An Education in Malice. I doubt they are going to change too much with the ending of the book, unless there is something in it that is just so bad I have to mention it. All in all, I think this will be getting a 3-star from me, and I am now going to be removing it from my TBR, and it is now going to be on my red shelf. So stay tuned as I read The Wolf Gift and the 2 Batman comics. So yesterday I finished Gotham by Gaslight by Brian Augustyn, Michael Mignola, and other collaborators. It was an extremely short little Otherworlds tale about Batman being set around the same time as the Jack the Ripper murders. This time Jack the Ripper escapes London without being caught for his crime, and he starts to do the same murders of women in Gotham City. Bruce has just returned back to Gotham City after doing his worldwide training to become Batman, but he actually gets framed for the murders. So the main point of the issue is to establish the universe, establish Bruce Wayne's role in it, in his backstory and everything, and how he manages to absolve himself of the Jack the Ripper murders and catch the killer. Ultimately, I thought that this was just an okay story. It was a little bit too short to get into the real nitty-gritty of things. However, this was written in the 1980s, so of course people are going to think that this is a really neat and exciting, cool, influential comic, because I'm sure it was one of the first superhero comics to really get into the Jack the Ripper murders. I understand in the 70s and 80s there was a huge boom in popularity for Jack the Ripper. He was featured on television shows and in B-movies and in horror movies, so adding him into a comic series was probably really fresh and exciting, and to put it into Batman, of course, who is like the horror superhero guy, was just pretty cool stuff, I bet. I wasn't a huge fan of the reveal because it was a little bit obvious, but the story was short enough that it wasn't disappointing. I also found the art in this graphic novel to be very interesting. I liked all of the kind of golden yellow and kind of this color of blue of the daytime and the nighttime. I thought that it had a very nice color palette and really showed the sort of 1800s Gotham very, very nicely. So ultimately, it was not my favorite Batman short comic Elseworld story that I've ever read, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. So it is getting 3 stars from me. And next, I will be diving into The Wolf Gift by Anne Rice, so stay tuned for my thoughts as I go. This one will take the longest for me to read. Okay, so I have started The Wolf Gift by Anne Rice. I am now 264 pages into the story. This story is about a young man named Reuben who has this kind of rich family life, a girlfriend, and he's a reporter. So he is going to a very famous old house in the woods and meeting with the woman who now owns it because her father was declared missing and is now officially declared dead. During this inciting incident, the house gets attacked by members of the family who wanted to own it but didn't get it in the will, and Reuben is turned into a werewolf as a result of the killing and attack and everything. So the rest of the novel is him trying to solve the mystery of what he is, what came to be, why this happened to him, and what is so important about the house and the people within it. I remember when this book came out in 2012, most people were like, of course Anne Rice would write a werewolf book. That is a no-brainer. She wrote about vampires, she wrote about ghosts, she wrote about witches. Why not werewolves? But to me, this does not seem as captivating as her vampire stories. I didn't particularly like her witch stories, but I understood that she had a vision that she wanted to write out. She had a lot of plans, a lot of lore, and a lot of her usual descriptive and emotional writing. This book is in the later stage of her writing career, so I'm guessing she was a little bit influenced by the changing market at the time, but this book does not truly read as deeply as her other novels. I could tell with her other novels that she had something deeply rooted that she wanted to say, deeply emotional. Of course, a lot of the inspiration for her other novels were based on either the tragedies that she had faced in her own life, as well as the historical interest of several time periods. She would write on and on about the Renaissance, about certain time periods, certain artists, etc. And this book is modern day, and there isn't a lot of that usual Anne Rice vigor in this book. It's pretty standard, it's pretty by the numbers. The things that I do appreciate about this book are that when the main character turns into the werewolf or the man-wolf that he calls himself, he enjoys it. He takes pleasure in the transformation process and in being in the wolf form. That is not something you really see in other werewolf books. A lot of werewolf books are a metaphor for pain, for chronic pain, or in women's case, in their menstrual cycle and stuff. So for this book to have him taking complete pleasure in turning into the man-wolf, that's pretty unique and exciting. However, the rest of the book, I really don't care about the origins of why he turns into this. I think there is a little bit of a boring repetition going on in here because it's just him going, I should go be a wolf. No way, I have to write this article for my newspaper. Oh, I have a girlfriend I'm not really interested in. I want to go to my house and be a wolf man. A lot of that has just been these 200 pages, and a lot of it does not have a lot of good theming. There's a little bit of philosophical discussion, but it is not that interesting to me, and it's not making me think about the idea of what does it mean for someone to turn into a man-wolf and kill evildoers. I mean, the killing evildoers thing is described a lot more in the Vampire Chronicles. So ultimately, I am not enjoying this book. If I don't manage to finish it by the end of the vlog, I'm guessing the rest of the book is going to be the same, but in my monthly reading vlog, I will let you know my final thoughts about it if it doesn't make it into this vlog. So I will either update you soon about the ending, or I will update you in my final wrap-up where I discuss the rest of the books that I read, so stay tuned. So let's finish off this vlog by reading Batman and Dracula Red Rain. Okay, so I finished Batman and Dracula Red Rain by Doug Moench, Kelley Jones, and other collaborators, and I thought that that story was pretty good as well. It is a story set in the 90s about Batman encountering the real-life Dracula and a lot of his disciples and trying to fight off an intense vampiric force. Now, this one isn't set in the 1800s like the Jack the Ripper story. This one's set at the time of publishing, and I thought that it was really, really cool. I really like Kelley Jones as a Batman artist. He does the Batman ears super, super, super pointy, and he does the cape like its own like entity and like sentient thing. I just think that it is a super, super cool art style, and of course you will use Kelley Jones for the vampire story. I understand that it is only the first part in the big arc about Bruce becoming a vampire, but this was the one where he defeated Dracula, so I thought it was a very cool and interesting idea to put Batman into. I wasn't a huge fan of the other vampires introduced, a lot of original characters and weird lady vampires, but ultimately I thought it was a fun and interesting story. Not much to say on it since it was a kind of short issue, but I did enjoy Bruce luring Dracula over by cutting himself and bleeding everywhere and taunting Dracula saying, "Yeah, my blood's so awesome, come and get me, come and fight me." I really liked that moment. So ultimately it was another very interesting kind of Otherworlds, Elseworlds Batman story that I got to read and finally get off of my TBR list. Okay, here we are finally at the wrap-up for my little clearing things off of my TBR reading challenge. Now for this challenge, I managed to read 4 things off of my TBR. I read Gotham by Gaslight by Brian Augustyn, Michael Mignola, P. Craig Russell, David Hornung, with an introduction by Robert Bloch, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 to 4 stars. I really enjoyed this little tale of Batman and Gotham being set around the same time as the Jack the Ripper murders, and I thought it was a very interesting take on the Batman mythos and how he fights crime and what it means for him to be a hero whilst he's being accused of being Jack the Ripper himself. It is a good tale to show if Bruce's vengeance is properly being used for good when he can be so easily read as a vengeful figure meant to do evil. So it's a really, really nice, interesting read. And having Jack the Ripper as a villain is pretty interesting as well. Like I said, the reveal of who Jack the Ripper was a little bit too quick, but like I said, it is just a smaller comic meant to encapsulate just this really cool aesthetic and mystery. So I really, really enjoyed this. This was on my TBR for a couple of years because it just never managed to make it into my monthly comic reading circulation, but now that I've read it, I'm glad to say that I am glad that I found it and wanted to read it and have now read it. Next, I read Batman and Dracula, Red Rain by Doug Moench and Kelley Jones, and once again that is a 3.5 to 4 star. I really enjoyed the idea of Batman facing off against Dracula. I really enjoy Kelley Jones's art style, and I may someday continue into the story where Bruce has to deal with being a vampire as a result of this story. Now, this story has been on my TBR for a little bit because, once again, it just did not manage to make it into my comic reading circulation for each month, as it is just kind of a spooky little tale on its own. But obviously, I love Batman, I love Dracula, so of course I was eventually going to get to it. And I'm kind of glad that I read both this and Gotham by Gaslight at the same time, because they were both comics that I did not manage to fit into any other reading times, so I'm glad that I got those both out of the way now, since they are both just little Otherworlds tales with spooky results. Next, I read An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson, and I'm giving this one 3 stars. While it wasn't what I expected it to be, and I thought that it skewed a little bit too young for me, ultimately it is a good story and a pretty interesting Carmilla retelling. This book was on my TBR for so long because I could not manage to get a copy of it. When this first came out, S.T. Gibson was an independent author. I know plenty of people have the original A Dowry of Blood publishing, from the independent book publisher. They have now since been re-released by an official publisher, and that's the copy I have. So this book just took a while to get a proper publishing and for me to get access to it. This one was actually a gift from my sibling who ordered the book online, so I'm so glad to receive this very beautiful copy, this beautiful hardcover copy, and I am ultimately glad that I read this because I am going through S.T. Gibson's work and so far really enjoying it. If this one is going to be the worst one, in my opinion anyway, that's actually not that big of a deal because I did not hate this. And finally for this video, I am reading The Wolf Gift by Anne Rice. This one was the longest book on my TBR, even though I only added it a few years ago because I finally got the copy. I have been interested in this book since the date of publishing, which was 2012. I still have a third left of the book to read. I think I understand what the rest of the book is going to be, so I can still review it as such. While there are a few cool concepts, cool lore, and interesting mystery to solve in this novel, I think ultimately it is not as emotional, evocative, and beautiful as the Vampire Chronicles, but I can't compare everything she's ever written to the Vampire Chronicles. Those are very close both to her heart and to mine. I think The Wolf Gift is an interesting idea and take on werewolf fiction because there is not a lot of werewolf lore to sort of base your stories on. A lot of the old werewolf tales are old short stories from the 1500s, even the 1300s into the 1800s, and there is no set lore for werewolves because it's so encapsulating in different countries, and especially around Europe there were different myths. So to try and create a myth for yourself and turn the man-wolf into a vengeful figure who kills evildoers while taking pleasure in becoming the monster is a very, very interesting take on the werewolf, when most werewolf metaphors are a sign of addiction or suffering or breeding or otherwise a different medical condition. So that is a very interesting take on the werewolf mythos. And I do think it's funny to add an erotic side to the man-wolf, that being his current love interest has only ever slept with the main character while he is in his man-wolf form. He's still anthropomorphic in his wolf form, so yeah, but you know what? Go monster fuckers, I guess. This one has been on my TBR for the longest because I did not have a copy, but also I just think that I didn't want to get to it because I did not want to finish all of Anne Rice's works, at least her supernatural fiction. And now that I'm getting close to finishing it, it feels kind of sad because, you know, she is gone now and I'm going to have read mostly everything she's ever written. I don't think I will read her erotica or her Jesus fanfiction. So getting that close to the finish line feels a little like bittersweet in a sense because now there's nothing else for me to read from my favorite author. So that kind of sucks a little bit, but I am ultimately glad that I picked this up, and hopefully with the final third of it still to be read, I enjoy it. So that's it. That was my fun little reading challenge where I tried to read the oldest books off of my Goodreads TBR. I know it's not as exciting as other people's because some people have had books on their TBR for like 10, 11 years, and mine have only been from like the past 3 or 4. So I hope you enjoyed the video anyway. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and look forward to more videos from me coming soon. See you around. Bye bye.